Hi, everybody. I'm back. Welcome back, those of you who are there, who've come back, and welcome aboard, those of you who are here for the first time. We had so much fun last week telling ghost stories that I decided to do it again. Ugh. So, at the risk of being redundant from last week, I have to explain a little bit about the spooky Ms. T.I. thing. I've been called spooky since I was a kid because I have always been able to connect with and experience and see, hear, feel, taste, touch things in different dimensions. Ghosts, absolutely, but other things as well. And so people have said, well, you're pretty spooky. So that's where the spooky Ms. T.I. comes from. Um, I've not. This is not something that scares me. I have been frightened. I admit it. I have been really freaked out at times. And as I get older, I'm realizing that a lot of those things that freaked me out were just something next to me, like other things in the room right now. Are your lights off? Because it feels like right now, with all this stuff going on in the world, that there's a thinning of things. I don't know if you're sensing it, but maybe it's because we're getting quiet and we're kind of in our own space and we're not so crazy busy that we just ignore everything that goes by. But I've heard from multiple people that they are sensing something around us, something in the that I got to tell you, I've known that this has been around us all the time since I was a very little girl. So last week I talked about the school where I teach now, or where I did teach. This will be my last year teaching, and if things go the way that it looks like they're going, I think I may have taught my last day, which makes me really sad, but I've had a really good run of it, so it'll be okay. I told stories about that school, and since then people have reached out to me to tell me other things that had happened at that school. So there's been some comments on the page and in the comment part for the video that I posted on this page, with some other incidents that have happened at the school to other people. So there's that. So I thought I'd continue with the school haunting theme. It's funny, but you hear a lot about schools being haunted, and schools are not places where people often die. I mean, you die of embarrassment, you die of a bunch of other things at school, but it's not like a place where someone has had serious trauma and died there, and so their ghost is trapped there. I think that spirits that haunt schools do that by choice. I think there may be other things that also may be factors in creating hauntings at schools. And I think that was the case at St. Anne's here in Cadillac, the old St. Anne's, not the new building. Don't worry, all those of you that send your kids there. The new building is fine. It's the old building that was over on Oak Street across from the hospital. And so the way we got up here to Michigan was we were living in Chicago, and our good friends Frank and Shelley would come when Lost World String Band would play, and the bands would stay with us in Chicago when they'd pass through with musicians that we knew. And one time they were visiting, and I just made the statement, man, I got to get out of Dodge. I had to take a day off school to go to the DMV, and at that time I was still walking with two canes, and we lived on the second floor of a two-flat, granny flat, and so I would often have to get up the stairs by scooting up on my tuchus. It was not the best case scenario, and everything was really hard in Chicago. So I just made an offhand remark that man, I got to get out of Dodge. And Frank said, you'd leave Chicago? And I said, in a New York minute. Well, in a Chicago minute. And he told me that the school where he taught was going to have a whole bunch of openings. It was about this time of year. that they were visiting, and he told me that there was a lot of turnover going to happen. Apparently there was some big political upheaval, and so a lot of people were leaving all of a sudden, and I thought, oh boy, political upheaval sounds perfect. But so I said I would be really interested, and he let the folks know. I filled out an application. Now they were hiring a new principal that lived in Milwaukee, and Sister Ann was her name, and no, Sister Carol. Sister Ann was later. Sister Carol was her name, and she got my application, and we agreed to meet at a diner between Milwaukee and Chicago along 294 for our interview. And it was a great interview, and I really liked her a lot, and apparently she liked me too, and so I got the job. So we packed up our place in Chicago and moved without a place to live to Cadillac. We lived in our pop-up in Frank and Shelley's backyard for that whole summer while we looked for a place to live. I remember Zach was like 3 years old, or 4 maybe, and he sat on my lap, and everyone was going home from up north, and he sat on my lap and said, I have no home. But we did have a home. We were making a new home. And we did find a wonderful place to live, and we still live in that place now. And I started teaching at St. Anne's. Now, the first time I went in there, I remember I was going into a fully equipped first grade room, unlike my first teaching job where I had a fully unequipped kindergarten room in Chicago. It had everything that I needed. And there was a nun who had been the first grade teacher, and she was going in to work at the ISD. She did American Sign Language, and she was going to work with hearing impaired kids. So not only did I get a fully equipped room, she left me all her stuff, and she showed me some of the systems that she was using, which were just fabulous. So I worked with her for a few weeks in that summer, in the end of the summer, to get things established, and my first class of first graders came in. Now, while I was setting up the classroom, I was there a lot in the room alone. There were other people in the building, and you'd hear noises throughout the building, but my classroom the first grade room was when you came in the door from the street, was the first one on the right, and it was built. The building was built in 1960, and it had a wall with a ledge about this high, and then what would have been windows that went way up to the ceiling. But during the oil crisis in the 70s, they closed off half the windows, so there were only small windows along the window ledge, and so you didn't get a whole lot of light or ventilation in those rooms. But when I was there working, I just felt somebody there. I just knew that there was somebody there. And I felt a presence of somebody very dominant. And I also felt like a presence of multiple people, multiple things. But more than that, I felt the presence of something else, like below something. Now, the school didn't have a basement or anything like that, but I just felt as though there was when I sensed something, I felt it coming from the ground. I could feel like an energy coming from the ground itself. Now, Cadillac's on an end moraine, and there's a lot of sand, and there's a lot of history, and it's in the historical old part of town, so I thought, there's just probably a lot of energy in this place, and I just go about my business when I'm working in that kind of environment, which happens a lot, and just started teaching. And then I think we were there like 5 years. We moved into the new building after I was there 5 years, but in those 5 years, a lot of very strange things started happening. I had one student who was very, very stressed out. I couldn't have her seat by the door because she said somebody kept walking past the door. So I said, well, who's walking past the door? We're at the end of the hall, and just ignore it. I'll just close the door. She said, no, somebody keeps moving past the door. So I said, well, I'll just move you where you don't have to be by the door. Would that work out? She said, that'd be great. So she was way back in the other corner. Now, the way the room was set up is the door, you came in the door and there was a blackboard, and yeah, it was a blackboard. I think they were green though. And then in the back of the room, on the east side of the room, there was this cupboard that closed. There were no lockers in the building. It was a closet. And it opened with these doors, and it had coat hooks and things in the back. And they were these light-colored wood doors that opened. And she didn't want to be over by those doors either. So I just put her about halfway between the front door and the closet doors. And nobody really stayed in their desk very long. The way that I taught was very movement oriented, and children were up and doing workshops, and so it was okay. She seemed to be okay, but I couldn't stay late after school because my own children went to school there, so we would all go home together. But it takes a lot of planning and preparation to put together first grade classrooms. And so you need planning time. And we did not have much planning time. I don't think we had any planning time during the school day. We had a lunch break where we would all go and eat in the library because there was no real teacher's room. There was a teacher's workroom. Let me describe the building a little bit for you. Okay, so my classroom was when you first came in the door from the parking lot. And then there was a long hallway. And the classrooms, of course, were lined up on all the sides of the hallway. It was first, then second across the street, or not across the street, across the hall. Then third, fourth, fifth. There was an all-purpose room in the middle there that was another classroom that wasn't being used. I think it was used for sixth grade when they had the sixth grade there. Excuse me. Excuse me. Oops, I should have done that in my sleeve. Well, nobody's here. Anyway, and then the bathrooms were all the way down at the far end of the hall on the left. There was first the boys' bathroom that always smelled like urine. I mean, even minutes after being cleaned, it was like in the grout or something. It was just, you'd walk past and go, ooh, that's boys' bathrooms that from schools built in the 60s. Then drinking fountains, and then the girls' bathroom. And on the other side of the hallway, there was the door to the library. It was a small library. And then the library also had a door that opened up into the office. And the office had a reception area. And then the principal's office was a very small office off the reception area toward the south. And in that principal's office, there was one of those old intercom systems with the old silver microphone, and you'd push the button and you could talk into that microphone, and each of the classrooms had loudspeakers and all that good stuff. And then as you went from the office, straight ahead was the gym, and the gym was a big tile floored gym. It was not a wood floored gym, with a stage right there on the right. And then on the left, all the way down, was the kitchen. And the kitchen, the cooks cooked for everybody, and everybody took hot lunch. You didn't have a choice. You had to pay for hot lunch because that's the only way that they could support it. And it was not a vendor hot lunch. This was I think Caroline was the cook, and she would come in early in the morning and get dough rising to bake homemade hamburger buns or cinnamon rolls. We didn't do breakfast at school, but we did do lunch, and she would be there before anybody would be there to get things started and rising, and she was it was not institutional food at all. She was a great cook. But she, I remember saying, really did not like to be there alone. Now, there were two ladies who worked in the lunchroom, and I can picture both of them, but I can only remember Caroline's name right now. One of you that was at St. Anne's will remember the blonde lady. What was her name? Oh my gosh. But when Caroline would get there before her coworker, she said she would wait to go in until they were both there because it just gave her the creeps to go in by herself. And she, it was like this big, you go in the kitchen and then this big dark gym in front of you. And then the stage that was also this big dark stage. So it was not a very early in the morning friendly place to be. Plus, I'm pretty sure she was sensing some of the things that I was sensing there and just not acknowledging it because that's what most people do. So I started to tell you that I didn't stay after school to get my work done. I would go a little early, but again, I had to have the kids with me, so I couldn't go too early. So what I would do is on Sunday afternoon, I would go and spend a few hours doing lesson plans and getting my room ready for the week. And Buncey'd be home here with the kids. And, when you're a teacher, you're really a teacher all the time. And I was home on the S days, but I had to go work on one of those S days to get things ready. S days, Saturday, Sunday. Well, I also kind of really enjoyed this time by myself because I could really focus on what I needed to do without distraction. I did prep constantly and was always assessing what kids were doing, and each day I changed things and was doing that. But to have a big chunk of time where I could be creative and think about cool things to go in centers, etc., that was really fun time for me. So I was there. It was winter. And nobody else was in the building. One of the things that we all did was when we got there, we would go in the hall and announce ourselves. And I would always announce myself, not just to any of the teachers who might be working there, but to anybody else who was there so that they wouldn't be surprised by me there and I them. And no one was there. And I went to go in my room and I heard this like commotion, like movement of people moving around, like children moving around, or like just a commotion down towards the end of the hall. And so I went back out the door. I had just walked in the room and I called back out and I said, "Hello, I'm in here. Who's here?" And I looked and none of the lights were on. The hall, had classrooms off of it. So when I came in the end door, I didn't turn hallway lights on because it wasn't necessary. And it just grew darker and darker down the hall. But if someone was in a classroom, the doors had windows on them and you would see somebody's lights on coming through. And I didn't see anybody's lights. And I thought, well, that's odd. I wonder who's here. And I thought, well, maybe down in the kindergarten room, because sometimes Mrs. Stearns would be in working and she would close her door because she had little kids and they'd be playing in there. And I thought maybe she has a poster on the door or something. So I'll just walk down so I don't startle anybody. And I walked down the hall and I went to open her door and it was locked. And I listened. And as I went down the hall, the noise just completely stopped. And as I went further and further down the hall, I got more of that fluttery feeling and that sense of uh-oh, where the hair in your nose kind of stands on end. And I just felt really uneasy. And so I just called out again, "Is anybody here?" And there was no answer. So I turned to go back down to my classroom. And as I was almost to my classroom door, I heard this loud bang as a door slammed. And I must have jumped 10 feet. I was like, and I looked back down the hall. Now, none of those doors had been opened. And I was like, okay, nobody's here. And I started to go back in my room. And the minute I walked through the door, bang, another door slam. And I went in my room and I got my coat and my stuff. And I grabbed my bag of things and did a little bit more winging it that week in the classroom. I took some work home with me, but I did not stay. I felt so uncomfortable. I felt like it wasn't just a "hey, I'm here" kind of thing. I felt a very aggressive energy, and it was like, go home. And so I left. and went home. And when I got home, Bunsey says, "Oh, did you? That was quick. Did you get done?" I said, "No. Somebody was slamming doors, and I didn't. I decided not to stay." And he was used to that with me because he knows spooky misty eye. So there were things that happened. I'll tell you another time I went on a Sunday, and I was there by myself. And this time I was dropped off. We had one big van. It was this beat up, rusted conversion van. Those of you who knew us back in the 80s probably remember that van. It was well known around town as the Bunsey's van. I think it had Band-Aids on rust spots even. I don't recall exactly, but it was just that was our van, and we had one vehicle, and so I was dropped off at school that day. And I went in, and I checked to see if anybody was there, and it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is not at night. I don't go there. I wouldn't go there at night by myself. That was too uncomfortable. But 2 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sunny day, nothing. Anybody here? Nobody here? And I said, I'm going to just walk down the hall and I announced myself as I went. I'm checking to see if anybody's here. Are there any teachers here? And I went all the way down to the end. Every room was dark. The office was dark. Everything was dark. And I said, okay, I'm going to be working. Leave me alone. Remember, I'll talk to ghosts like that. Like, don't bother me now. I'm not open all the time, It's like sometimes you don't answer your phone, you know what I'm saying? So I got back in my room, and I decided to close the door because it was chilly, and the heat was turned way down. So I still had, I think I had my jacket on or something, and I was working, probably my poncho. I think I wore a poncho back then. And I was working on stuff, and all of a sudden, the loudspeaker was this old-fashioned loudspeaker box that was, it was wooden with that cloth inside the speaker, and a square about this big, I'm blocking my face with the candle. And it was up above the closet doors, and you had the loudspeaker, and then you had the crucifix below it. And all of a sudden, I start hearing this static coming from the speaker. And I was like, that's weird. And I listened for a minute, and I watched it, and the static continued. And then I started to hear a voice. And it sounded like a woman's voice. And it was within the static, but it was like a... And at first I was really startled. And I thought, oh God. And then my other sense kicked in, my protective kind of sense kicked in, and I thought, oh my gosh, what if somebody is in the office? And I went down, I was just down there not too long ago and announcing myself. What if somebody got hurt in there and has triggered the loudspeaker, the intercom, because they needed help? And then it just went, and it stopped. And I was standing there thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Should I go check? Or should I just ignore it? And I waited. And I thought, okay, maybe it was nothing. Maybe like a radio station was coming through. That happens sometimes, right? On intercoms that are turned off, right? That can happen sometimes, I'm telling myself. And I thought, okay, never mind. Either way, it's done. So I get back to my stuff, and within minutes, just a few minutes, once again, I start hearing the static. And this thing, when the loudspeaker, when they'd make an announcement, it would always start with static. And then the announcement would come on, more there. I mean, it wasn't real clear. It was a 1960s intercom that was still up. We didn't use it all that often. Actually, almost never. I don't think announcements were made on it or anything. But I think anyway, it starts again. And I stood up and I looked at it and I tuned in to the sound of the voice. And the voice underneath the static sounded very frantic. Frantic in a way that really alarmed me. And I thought, somebody's hurt. So while it was still going on, I grabbed my cane and I broke down the hall and I went to the office, and the office door was locked. I unlocked the office door because I thought maybe somebody was in there working and had gotten hurt. And I opened up the door and it's completely empty. And I can still hear the static through the loudspeakers in all the classrooms and in the library. And I look at the machine and it's completely off. You had to flip a switch and it would turn on this green light. When it was off, there was no light, and it was in the off position. It was completely off. So now I am in the room with something that was turning on the loudspeaker, and I started to feel really uncomfortable. I started to get that feeling again, like, you should not be here. You should not be here. And it wasn't like a school ghost that I could say, knock it off. I felt threatened. I felt like I was not safe. So this is before cell phones. And the only phone is there in the office. And I'm in the building in the winter without a vehicle. And I'm not going to be picked up for a couple hours. And so I picked up the phone and I dialed our home phone. And it went to that answering machine. Remember those old-fashioned answering machines? You should have heard some of the things that my kids put on those answering machines. Well, that's a whole nother story someday. But they would do the greeting. Not yet, because they were pretty young at this point. But, oh my gosh, we can't come to the phone because we've all got syphilis. That kind of thing. But so the message comes on, and of course the greeting message Bunsey did, and so it was rather long. And I waited for the message, and then it went beep. And I said, I need to leave school now, so as soon as you get this, come pick me up. I'm going to be waiting outside. And I hung up the phone, and I hightailed it back to my classroom. I grabbed my stuff, and I waited out on that porch outside my door, and I still felt this intense uneasiness on the porch. So I went down the steps to the parking lot, thinking I just had to move away from the building. And as I went down toward the parking lot, I started feeling even more uneasy. And I was like, oh my goodness. Now, at this time, this was when the church was still right across the street. The St. Anne's Church was right across the street. The old St. Anne's Church, this beautiful old brick building. And I thought, well, I could go wait across the street. And then I thought, no, they won't find me. This is ridiculous. I'm outside. I'm fine. I'm going to just wait here on the sidewalk. And so I stood over by the great big sign. We used to refer to St. Anne's as Stan's School and Bingo because it said St. Anne's School and then the big words bingo because they'd have bingo there every week. So I stood by the Stan's School and Bingo sign and just waited and hoped that it wouldn't be too long before Bunce would get that message and come pick me up. And I don't recall how long I waited. I remember getting cold. And I didn't start walking home. It was only a mile home, but it was snowy. And that's real precarious for me. If I fall, it's not a good thing. So I just kind of waited. And eventually he came. And I think that may have been the last time I went by myself to work at school. And I started bringing my family with me. Sorry, guys. When I did my lesson planning, and they'd play in the gym or play in the hallway or, but they were there too, and Bunsey was there too, and so I wasn't there alone. And I think, I've talked to both Rachel and Zach this week as I was thinking of things that had happened at St. Anne's, and they both remember hearing the intercom come on when we were there. This was a regular occurrence. This happened often. It also happened when the classroom was full. All of a sudden the intercom would start with static, and maybe there was a short in it or something. There was no short in it. It would just come on. And something was just trying to communicate, trying to let us know things were going on. So, some other things that happened. The playground was just to the north of the school building. Now, the school was built in 1960. The original St. Anne's School was built early in the 1800s. As a matter of fact, in 1880 is when the St. Anne's Parish was established. But there were visiting priests that came, and when I saw an article as I was looking up dates and things this past week, and the St. Anne's School was there well before there was a church. It was operated by the Dominican nuns. Dominicans are, they wear white habits, and they have their veils have these big wings things on them, not like the flying nun, but close. They have very distinctive habits that are white. And they were nurses, and they were teachers, and they established a school in this little startup town of Cadillac with a lot of loggers and that sort of thing. And then when the church started, there was also, they built a church, they built a small structure, and then the bigger church, I think, was built in like 1908 or something like that, if I'm maybe 1880. 1880 is when they built the church. And then they built the Mount Carmel Cemetery, which is the Catholic cemetery in Cadillac, and was dedicated in 1881. Prior to that, turns out there was another Catholic cemetery that was adjacent to the school and the church. And when it was moved, it was not practical to dig everything up. I know this happened a lot in the frontier in Michigan. I mean, there are other places, Cary, Martin, where cemeteries were moved and not all of the bodies were moved. But in this case, it turns out that many of them weren't, and the gravestones were moved. And there's a place in Mount Carmel now that has the older gravestones that used to be in the other cemetery. And I remember being at the Historical Museum and looking at where the old cemetery was, and guess where it was? Just take a wild guess. Go ahead, post where you think it is in your comments, where the old cemetery was. Anybody? The old cemetery was right where the school in which I was teaching and the playground was. And the area just right across the other street. Now, cemeteries aren't often haunted by people, but something that I've learned in my life and in my dealings with things beyond the veils, plural, is that there are elementals, there are beings, there are conscious entity beings who have different purposes in the world, in the universe. And some of them have symbiotic relationships with humans. Some have parallel existences. Some can feel malevolent, but the malevolence is more or less just disregard, from my understanding, is what I've experienced. And something that I've learned is that when people bury their dead in a place, it either attracts this certain kind of elemental, or people choose places where they are. I'm not sure how exactly that works. It's all I know is that every cemetery I have been in has had an elemental being that dwells in that cemetery, and I have dubbed them grief eaters, because what I've seen, what I've learned, is that these beings, and they're beings, they're not demons, they're not evil, they are conscious persons. I mean, if you think of the definition of a person, conscious persons that go to places where we bury our dead, and they get their energy when we release our grief. If you think about when you have been to the cemetery when someone you've loved has passed away, we open the earth. We all stand around that opening and weep, and we let out our grief. And our grief feeds these grief eaters. This is what I've come to learn. How do I know this? I just know it. I've experienced it. I've seen it. Now, when cemeteries get moved, grief eaters aren't always able to move with the gravestones. They are established in a place. I think some get lost, some get trapped in a place, some are able to move with grief, follow it as things are moved. If you remove bodies and take your grief with you, sometimes they can follow. I think that the phenomenon of building on an old burial ground, whether it be a Indian burial ground or a Tibetan burial ground or any burial ground, and the phenomena that happen with people with hauntings on these can almost certainly be attributed to a grief eater who is still there and still looking for nourishment. So I'm wondering if some of the things in that place that we felt, some of when I was teaching at St. Anne's, this was before I had learned about grief eaters. It was before I had had multiple experiences with them. And so I was sensing the energy from this elemental being who dwells still in that area. And I kind of, it's supposed to be no unnecessary trips, but I felt like it was a necessary trip this week, since I was going to be telling these stories, and I just drove over and sat in the parking lot there, which the playground is all paved over, but the parking lot is still there. And I just sat and tried to sense what, if anything, is still there. And it is still there. So now what's in that area is the Macaulay Center is there. I've been to meetings at the Macaulay Center, which is in the old building, the old St. Anne's building, and walk in and holy moly, it's like, hello, it's the same energy. There is no intercom system anymore. But there is a scuffle and stuff there, as I was walking down the hall to go to the meeting. I was drawn to that gym. So that's why I think some of this stuff happened. There was a lot more things that happened. I remember we would do our Christmas programs on the stage there, and one Christmas program, we were doing a silly like nativity, and my younger daughter Era was an angel, and she was really pissed off about being an angel. She wanted to be the donkey, and Zach got to be the donkey, and he had this donkey costume, and she, having an affinity for animals, she wanted to be a donkey, so she was not happy about being an angel. And to be honest with you, it would have been a much better fit for Zach to be an angel and Era to be the donkey, the hard-headed donkey, than the other way around. But she was not happy about it, and she was kind of angry. And the kids would line up behind stage. Now, there was an entrance to the south that was right by the office, and then you had the stage, and behind the stage there was a workroom. And that workroom had a copy machine and other, mimeograph machines and storage for supplies and stuff. It was this long, narrow, dark space, and at the end of it was an office where the director of religious ed had an office back in there, and I think there may have been someone else, but there was an office back in there. And so the kids would wait to go on the stage. All the folding chairs were out in the gym, and they were lined up in that back corridor. You had to go in through by that long office and then get ready to go on stage. And Era and all the kids were lined up, and it was time to come out. And she started to walk out. She felt like one of her wings was caught on something. And she thought, there was something sticking out that caught her wing, or somebody had grabbed it. And she looked behind her, and there was nobody there. And she pulled, and whatever it was let go, and she went off on stage there. In that workroom, there was like this long counter in the center that you could work on. And so you could lay out your papers and whatever. And there was a Christmas that we had, I think we had like $13 to spend on Christmas. So we were making all our Christmas presents, and with the 4 kids in the house, we couldn't do anything big. And I was building this dollhouse with wood scraps that I got, and it was for Barbies, and I put together collapsible walls on hinges, and so it was big enough to play with the Barbie dolls in, and hot gluing furniture together and stuff. And I was there working on that and in that space. And as I was there, I felt this rush past me, like this, and with it wind and stuff. And I thought somebody had opened the door in the back. There was a back door that was down below the ground, and then you'd walk up the steps through there. And back when you could like smoke at school and stuff, you could sit back out there and have a cigarette, and so it was a back door that would open. So I thought somebody was out there and had opened that door, and I thought, that's odd. People don't use that door to come in. And when I checked, there was of course nobody there, and the cold rush was just that. And so I was like, I have to finish this. So I just stayed. The custodian there, Kevin, was the custodian, and he was just a lovely person. He was, I think he had some developmental disabilities, but he was just the sweetest, kindest guy. And of course, we befriended him and had him over for meals, and he hung out with the kids. He was single, lived with his mother in his 30s, and he worked nights, and he would call, because we were his friends there, we made friends with him. He would call at least once a week to see if Bunce could go help him work, because he wasn't going to be able to get everything done that he had to get done when actually talking to him, he was having really strange things happen, and he wanted Bunce to come help him, so he wasn't there alone. The building would be locked up, and he'd be cleaning and working on stuff, and he heard the door slamming. He heard voices coming from back behind the stage. And when he went back there, he heard footsteps that ran out the other way and ran around. And he thought that somebody had gotten in the building and was going to do some vandalism, so he called the city police. And this is about 11 o'clock at night, 11:30 at night. And the police come, and they search the entire building. And they search under the stage, because there were these doors that opened up under the stage, and all of the chairs and everything were stored there, because he said he heard them run around the stage and then disappear in the gym. So the police thought maybe there was somebody inside there and they were hiding under there, so they had their big flashlights, and they searched the entire place, and there was nobody there. And they said, I don't know what you heard, maybe there was sounds on the street or something. And he's like, this was not on the street, this was in here. They said, well, there's nobody here, so you're okay. And I think that was one of the nights he called to see if Buncey would help. He called the police 3 or 4 different times, thinking that there were people in the building, because there were. He had where he would lock all of the classroom doors. He had his cleaning cart thing, and the custodian's closet was down by the bathrooms, and he would have all the doors closed, and he was putting his custodian's closet away, or his custodian's cart away, and he walked out of the closet and every one of the doors was back open. And so he thought, I forgot to close the doors. So he went down and he closed them, and they were all locked. He checked it, and he went back down to dump his wash bucket. And when he came back out of the custodian's closet, once again the doors were all open. So he decided this night he wouldn't call the police, he'd just go home. And that morning when we all got to school, all our doors were still open, because he didn't bother closing them again, because they would just open again. So let's see, what are some of the other things that have happened there? Oh, on the playground. Oh, this is really weird. You'd find things. It was a sand lot, and you would find things in the sand. The kids would come in with stuff they found in the sand that was really weird stuff, like old bits of jewelry. Now, it was a sand lot playground, and you could lose jewelry in a playground easy peasy. I mean, kids would lose jewelry, but one time my first graders came in and had something they were showing me, and like, what's this? We found this out in the playground. It was way back by the big tree. There was this one big tree back by the playground that, by the way, was probably there when it was still a cemetery. Big oak tree. And they're showing it to me, and I look at it, and it's like it was a tooth. It was a tooth, like an old molar that had a filling in it, that had like a crown, tooth crown or something, a piece of a tooth that they found on the playground. And this was not like the first graders or second graders, third graders or fourth graders or fifth graders losing a tooth. This was a really old adult molar that was buried in the sand where the kids were playing. And as they're digging in the sand, they're finding teeth and things like that, which is just insane. So this place is still there. I'm sure there are a lot more stories from the Haunted St. Anne's, is what we called it. Haunted Stand School and Bingo. I'm sure that some of you who went there have your own stories. Oh, I can't forget this one. Okay, I'm going to end with this one because it's been 50 minutes already. Boy, time flies when you're having fun, eh? This was probably the most significant thing that I recall happening there. So it was when I was teaching second grade. I moved from first to second, but I was in the same classroom. And Era was in my class. And she could not go out for recess. She was sick or something, or was getting over an ear infection. I don't remember, but for some reason, she wasn't able to go out for recess. So she was going to stay in the classroom. And she asked if she could have some friends stay in the classroom with her. And, I'm the teacher, I'm the mom, and the school, it was tiny. You had one class of each grade. So there were only 5 classes there. And I knew everybody, and, what could they possibly do while I'm down taking a break in the library with the other teachers and running some copies of some things. They'll be fine, right? So while I was gone, a little probably too long, Era decided, oh, right. I'm reading from Era. She said that she had brought her bird, I believe it was Tiny. She brought her bird for show and tell. And so the bird was in the classroom. And the bird was going nuts all day. And the bird was just, making a racket. Now there are a bunch of, first graders in there, so I'm sure the bird was just joining in with the racket. But Era just had a way of being able to communicate with her bird. It was like this bird could talk to her. And the bird told her that there was something else going on. And so Era decided to, not that day? You didn't have the bird there that day? Well, anyway, the bird had told her that there was something in the room at another time then. And anyway, so she's in the classroom with, I believe, Kylie. Kayla, are you watching this? You probably remember this incident. Era thought it would be a really good idea to just do a seance and to ask the spirits that were in the classroom to make themselves known. And they sat down, and I don't know how they did it. Not sure exactly what they were doing. But all of a sudden, I'm down in that back copy room, and I hear this screaming, panicked screaming of little girls, and I step out, and they are running down the hallway toward me. And they came flying at me and freaking out in tears, just absolutely freaking out. And I said, what? I met them halfway down the hall. And they said, somebody came out of the wall. Up by the cross, there was somebody who came out of the wall. And I said, what do you mean there was somebody? There were brides. There was a bride who came in. And they described the bride. She was in a white dress and a white veil, and she looked really mean. And she came, and when we were sitting there, and she came right down at us, and she grabbed Kayla by the arm. I'm pretty sure it was Kayla, by the arm, and she wouldn't let her go, and I grabbed her, and we ran out. And I said, to describe the bride, and the description of the bride was how a Dominican nun would dress. And she was really mean, and she grabbed the child, one of the children having a seance, and they were just distraught. So Sister Ann, who was then our principal, came down and said, what's going on? And the girls said that something came out of the wall, that a bride came out of the wall and grabbed Kayla by the arm. We looked at Kayla's arm, and she had a handprint where someone had grabbed her arm. And we're like, Sister Ann and I are looking at each other, and Sister Ann said, it's okay, we're going to just pray. And she started praying. I mean, I don't know if she took out her rosary, but she said, we're all going to just pray for protection. We're going to pray this away right now. She wasn't like, you're crazy or get away from me or any of that. And she did some serious sister praying. and to dispel that, whatever it was that they called in. And we just carried on the rest of the day. And I don't believe Era stayed in for recess anymore after that. So, and I know Kayla didn't. But that was a huge incident. And this was before I was mindful and conscious enough to actually be able to say to a ghost, don't do that ever again, or to be able to actually make a ghost leave. I was not aware that I was able to do that yet. And so this thing, I had no idea. With that prayer, I just called on my angels, called on my protectors, and I said, you need to protect this space. So that's probably the most significant thing that happened there. Anyway, that's about it. Yeah, Era seance in second grade. True. That's about all I can think of right now. Remember, these things are not unique. Like when I talk about a grief eater, I'm sure you've been to a cemetery where you just feel a presence of something. And why would, if you're going to pass away and be a ghost, why would you be at a cemetery? Wouldn't you go to a place where you lived your life, instead of where your body went? But that's where the grief eater is. So think about that when you go to a cemetery, and think about that when you're thinking to build in some sprawling place that you want to get a sense for maybe what's in the earth before you put that first shovel in the ground, and think about who else is here. Who else is here with us? Because there's a lot of things here with us. So I am going to say good night. Thanks for listening. I'm going to try to figure out how to save this video so I can put it on my YouTube, because there have been people who've asked to put it on YouTube so that they can watch like on their smart TVs and that sort of thing. So hopefully I can figure this out. I have not been able to figure out how to transfer the video from last week. I was able to transfer the bedtime stories for kids to YouTube, so hopefully I'll remember that tonight and do that. So this was a lot of fun. And if you have suggestions, those of you who know me and have heard my stories and you want to hear more stories, it looks like we're going to be in this for a while longer. I heard today that we're talking about being stuck in till the end of April now, so that gives us several more weeks for more stories. So if you can think of any of mine that you know that you'd like to hear, I will try to tell some of those, and I'll be doing the same thing. Meanwhile, pay attention while you're in that quiet, while the world is shut down. When you walk outside, pay attention. You might be able to sense what's just beyond what we see with our eyes. Sleep tight. Good night.